Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird contains many lessons that the author intended on the reader absorbing. Throughout the novel, the main lesson Lee sought to communicate becomes clear. That lesson can be adequately expressed in words as harming the innocent is the worst crime of all. This lesson is almost directly stated within the novel when Miss Maddie says to Scout, "Mockingbirds don't do one thing but make music for us to enjoy, but sing their hearts out for us. That's why it's a sin to kill a mockingbird." The lesson is displayed multiple times outside the near direct stating of it. For example, when Tom Robinson is convicted of rape despite his supposed innocence, the most likely sentence coming his way is one that puts him on death row. Coming after a trial sequence that occupies a sizable portion of the book, this verdict is portrayed to the reader as an evil one born of racism. Therefore, supporting the claimed significance behind the lesson offered by Lee.
Yet again, this lesson is put on display later in the book. This comes when Bob Ewell goes on a menacing tirade tormenting a significant portion of those involved in the trial of Mr. Robinson. Those he chose to torment were notably powerless and innocent compared to Ewell himself, such as the time when he attempted to break into Judge Taylor's house. The novel can be quoted as Judge Taylor then realized he was speaking to an empty room. The scratching noise was coming from the rear of the house. A shadow on the corner of the house caught his eye, and that was all he saw of his visitor. It is later established within the writing that Bob Ewell was Judge Taylor's visitor. Ewell sought to vandalize Taylor's house under the guise that he would be at Sunday night mass. Ewell also chose to harass Tom Robinson's widow, Helen Robinson, while she was on her way to work. She later described the situation in the novel, saying when she was a few yards beyond the Ewell house, she looked around and saw Mr. Ewell walking behind her. She turned and walked on, and Mr. Ewell kept the same distance behind her until she reached Mr. Link Diaz's house. All the way to the house, Helen said, she heard a soft voice behind her, crooning foul words. This situation holds significance as it shows how Mr. Ewell followed and tormented a helpless woman who was totally innocent, as she had no involvement within the trial of her husband. This example is especially strong as the harassment came while Miss Robinson was all alone and could not possibly fight back. The final example of Ewell harassing the innocent comes when he attacks Scout and Jem on their way home from Scout's pageant. Scout shares her account of the attack, saying, "I could hear it myself then. Footsteps, I mean. They walked when we walked and stopped when we stopped. When we got under the tree, all of a sudden something grabbed me and mashed my costume. Think I ducked on the ground, heard a tussling under the tree, sort of. They were bamming against the trunk, sounded like. Jem found me and started pulling me towards the road. Mr. Ewell yanked him down, I reckon. They tussled some more, and then there was this funny noise. Jem hollered, and I didn't hear him anymore. And the next thing, Mr. Ewell was trying to squeeze me to death, I reckon. Then somebody yanked Mr. Ewell down. That's all I know." This example holds the greatest significance of the three, as it shows how Ewell was willing to attack the most innocent and vulnerable people he could find, a pair of young children whose sole involvement in the case lied in their father. Ewell would end up dead from his encounter with these children, as their neighbor, Boo Radley, came to the defense of the innocent as any respectable person would.
These examples are relevant as they serve as a warning to those who don't abide by Lee's lessons of harming the innocent being the worst crime of all. Lee's warning is that if you choose to harm the innocent, you may pay in just as severe a manner as Bob Ewell did.
There are a multitude of arguments one could supply either in support of or against the required reading of To Kill a Mockingbird within high school classrooms.
For example, one could make a strong argument in favor of the required reading on the basis of the important lessons on injustice, racism, inequality, oppression, and corruption that exist within the book. One may support these arguments for the required reading with quotes from the novel such as, "You aren't really a blank lover, then are you? I certainly am. I do my best to love everybody." They could further elaborate on this evidence, forming the argument that this quote instills a sense of acceptance within the reader, making for a more racially accepting youth within our communities.
On the other hand, an equally strong argument could be formed opposing the requirement of this reading on the basis of Atticus's perceived shortcomings. Atticus is painted within the book as a sort of civil rights activist fighting for the supposed innocence of a black man, Tom Robinson, who was accused of sexually assaulting a white woman. In his article, The Courthouse Ring, Malcolm Gladwell explores how Atticus Finch may not have been such a valiant hero and how his involvement in the fight for civil rights was severely over-exaggerated within the novel. Gladwell can be quoted saying, "Here again is attention for Finch's high-minded equanimity. He likes Walter Cunningham. Cunningham is, to his mind, the right sort of poor white farmer, a man who refuses a WPA handout and who scrupulously repays Finch for legal work. Against this, Finch must weigh the fact that Cunningham also leads lynch mobs against black people. So what does he do? He puts his personal ties first. Cunningham, Finch tells his daughter, is basically a good man, who just has his blind spots along with the rest of us. Gladwell's criticism of Finch could be easily used to make a point against the required reading of this novel, through the argument that, based on this evidence, Finch is not the type of person our youth should be exposed to, especially in the heroic light that the novel paints him in.
The first events of the novel revolve almost entirely around the mysterious neighbor of Scout and Jem, Boo Radley. Based on the town lore surrounding the infamous recluse, the children assume that Boo is a menacing character. This is clear in Chapter 1 when Jem describes Boo as someone who dined on raw squirrels and any cat he could catch, and that there was a long jagged scar that ran across his face. What teeth he had were yellow and rotten, his eyes popped, and he drooled most of the time. The strongest feeling the children have towards Boo is fear, closely followed by their insatiable curiosity surrounding the man. On a similar note, a large portion of the final chapters in the novel also heavily involve Boo. Over the course of the final chapters, Scout sees Boo for the first time. This comes after Boo saves her from being likely killed by Bob Ewell. After the initial encounter, Scout's strongest feelings toward Boo transitioned from being one of fear to being one of gratitude. Scout gained a deeper understanding of Boo and a greater appreciation for him as compared to what she possessed earlier in the novel.
This contributes to the overall message by providing a sense of perspective, allowing us as readers to fully understand the circumstances and ideas established by Jem, Scout, and Dale at the beginning of the novel. This permits us to dissect how those circumstances and ideas about Boo differ from the true reality of Boo's character that was finally established in the closing chapters of the novel.
Should Harper Lee's To Kill a Mockingbird, published in 1960, continue to be a state-required book for high school classes? Throughout the book, there are many different events that can alter one's opinion of the book. One might think that this book should, without question, be removed from high school English classes, as Atticus can come off as a bad role model. But others have a good reason to think that this book should continue to be read by all high school students because of the message. Looking at both arguments, it's safe to say that To Kill a Mockingbird should continue to be required of high school students.
After harsh consideration of both arguments, it becomes clear that To Kill a Mockingbird is highly reader-appropriate for high school settings. The lesson this book provides on the importance of avoiding bringing harm to the innocent is an incredibly powerful one. Within her novel, Lee does an excellent job of establishing that greater lesson to her readers, even the ones today, over 60 years after the book's publication.